Hello and welcome to Story X Story, the podcast by Maya Mada that dives deep into stories across pop culture, plus gives you advice on creating your own. It's episode 192, and I'm your co-host Nigel.
I am Tazziii, content creator and co-host.
And for our behind the story episodes, we like to talk to creative professionals and practitioners across industries to unpack their journey. And today, we're going to hear the story behind indie developer Moo Yu. Moo, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining. And we're basically going to mine your brain for information on the past, couple decades of games. So it should be a good one. You're getting a lot of perspective here. So for listeners, you can subscribe to Story X Story wherever you get your podcast from, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also send us your feedback and questions in a variety of ways. You can send us a voice message on our Spotify for Podcasters page. You can email us the old-fashioned way, studio77@mymatter.com, or you can do the newfangled thing and throw your thoughts at us on social media. We are at MyMatter on Twitter, at MyMatter TV on Instagram and TikTok, at Life of a W Gamer on Instagram and TikTok, or at Tazziii on Twitter. You can also join our Studio 77 Discord to be part of the Maya Matter community, and also consider becoming a Studio 77 member to support the work that we do within the brand. And speaking of, before we get to learn more about our guest, let's update you with the latest from the Maya Matter universe. We're making good progress on the new story, the Against All Odds, part of the origin story within the Maya Matter brand. So long-time listeners, or at least listeners over this year, will know that we did a Kickstarter early in the year, and we are now working on the artwork on the new story, Origins Against All Odds, which features Tazzii's character in the Maya Matter universe. So Kickstarter backers will be starting to see some artwork in the Discord as well. Might share, I don't know if I can't remember when this goes out, but by the time this goes out, I might have thrown a few things out on social media as well, but definitely Kickstarter backers. So this is a reflective, hope-filled manga about pursuing your creative career goals in the face of resistance from doubters and the world around you. So it's something that we hope will resonate with people on that creative journey, whatever stage you're at, and will be another good addition to the Maya Matter universe of stories as well. And you can see all the other stories from the world's first manga network that are online on our website, mymatter.com. We've got the titles there, Samurai Chef, which is the first one that we ever did, to Serious Through the Fog, which is the current latest one. They're all ages stories set within our shared universe. And as we stare down the barrel of the end of another year, we still have things to come for the Do I Look Like a Gamer campaign. So this is what we do yearly to promote diversity and inclusion in the video games industry, and also showcase pathways into games for young and aspiring talent. So it is a yearly initiative, and that means each year we do a new snapshot of 40 different players and makers to showcase the representation that does exist and inspire future generations of diverse talent, and also means a new schedule of events and activities. So we've been around so far this year. We've had our own events, Cupcake and Gamepad Social. We had the Games Industry Explained at King. We've been at Comic-Con once, and Barclays Game Frenzy. We dropped in at Develop as well. I'm sure I'm missing something, but we've got things to come. We have our Friends and Family Game Design Jam, which is in November the 23rd. So that will be a single-day event to introduce young and aspiring game developers to the concept of game design. So it's about bringing people together. So maybe you're coming in a group, family, friends, or even if you're coming as an individual, you can come and we'll place you somewhere. But it's all about working together to design a tabletop game and learn the fundamentals of game design that also work in video games. So head to looklikeagamer.com and you'll be able to see a link to the event where you can get tickets. It's a free event, but just so we know who's coming, you can RSVP. And we've also got, depending on when you're listening to this, you have a few days left before we're going to be at the Festival of the Girl. So that's a bit sooner. So that's October the 5th and 6th. So we'll be at the Islington Business Design Centre with the campaign, also with our manga, doing some activities at this event, which is aimed at bringing in young girls from 7 to 11 and just, getting them involved in different activities across different industries. There's a bunch of things going on. We know about the games bit, which is us, and comics. So yeah, we've got some Just Dance going on. Got some drop-in game design sessions, things like that. So join that. Then we'll be at Comic-Con at the end of October. So that's where we'll be, again, showcasing the campaign, doing different activities from workshop. Actually, that's going to be a first time we've done a workshop at Comic-Con. At least, obviously, we've done many elsewhere. But yeah, at Comic-Con, we've got a game design workshop going on. We're also going to be on stage in the creator stage talking video game adaptations, which will be an interesting discussion. So that's going to be on the Friday at 12 p.m. And then at our booth, we'll have different things, tabletop games, video games. I'm going to be showcasing some different types of games over a few days and giving people a chance to share their gamer origin story as well. So lots happening over October. It's going to be a busy one. And we would like to thank Rocksteady Studios for their sponsorship of the campaign for another year. It's their support that has been really instrumental in helping us bring this thing to life, making it sustainable and just allowing us to make that impact as we highlight the different roles and people that exist in games today. And yeah, they played a significant part in that. So we look forward to continuing working with them and others like them, with different companies in and around games who share the aspiration of shaping a more inclusive and diverse future for video games. So we also have our Studio 77 activity. So this is our digital platform over on Twitch where we talk to professionals across industries, kind of like what we're going to do today. But we also play games for your amusement, sometimes well, sometimes not. And yeah, we talk to different people across like comics, video games and animation. And we have a few different shows that we do. So we have the Studio 77 report. So that's where Tazziii and I recap the latest My Matter news announcements live on Twitch. So we stream our recording of it. So you can catch that behind the scenes look at how it comes together, or you can just wait for the edited version on YouTube. We have casual conversations with comic creators, which usually is on the first Tuesday of each month. So this is a monthly series where I talk to a different comic creator about the craft of making comics. So the next one, or actually the one just gone as you listen to this, if you're listening to it early, is my chat with Erin Angelini. So that will be available on Twitch VOD. So that was on the 1st of October and will be available 14 days after that. And then we'll announce the next guest for November once we get that sorted. And then we have a games night. So we have them usually towards the end of the month. So next one will be in October. We're doing a D&D thing, which is all I know so far. But it's going to be the first time I'm playing D&D. So that should be fun. Come and join us there. And yeah, if you're a young aspiring creative professional or you know one, then check out the My Matter Showrunners Work Experience Program. So this is where we have been creating opportunities for young people aged 16 and up to work with our team across comic production, events, and content creation. And as we record this, I actually just had a chat with the current cohort, couple great young professionals who've had a lot of input in the new comic as well, actually. So yeah, they've done really well there. And then we're about to bring in some new faces as well. So you can email us, showrunners@mymatter.com, to find out more about that. So that is where we are with the My Matter universe. And without further ado, let's go behind the story with today's guest.
Moo Yu is the creative director at Team Artichoke and a founding team member of Pock and Play. He has 20 years of experience and worked on titles like Knights and Bikes, LittleBigPlanet, and Ratchet and Clank. So we like to start these interviews with a question that we ask everyone, as creativity is very important to everything that we do at My Matter. What does creativity mean to you?
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about this because I'm a classic overthinker. Like everything I do, I'm like always like playing it over and over and over in my mind. And one of the things that naturally happens from that is that I start sort of taking value out of things. Like it feels like things are very arbitrary or things are kind of meaningless the more I obsess about them, or they become like very distant and abstract. So when I think about creativity, it's like for me, it's very much this search to add meaning back into the things in my life that I've sort of destroyed by overthinking. So it's always like trying to find that thing that is like so fundamentally human that I cannot escape it. I cannot deny the meaning in it. And I think whenever I'm thinking creatively, I'm trying to think like, how do I find those fundamentally human things that I can use to reconnect with people?
That is a really beautiful answer. I really like that. I love how unique our answers we get from asking that question and different perspectives. So you met Nigel at GDC networking event earlier in the year. As someone who has been in the industry for a long time, what is the value for these kinds of events?
I mean, I think this is like a great example of like you just never know who you're going to meet. And I think in particular for me, it is trying to find the people that have either shared goals for the future or shared values or that kind of stuff. And just trying to, think about how we can be stronger together. And like, with particularly with Nigel, he invited me to exhibit my game at the Gamepad event. And that was really useful to me. And obviously being here. And I think, yeah, going to events, it's very much for me a search for other people that will inspire me or that that we can collaborate in some way or that I can help in some way because I just feel like it is such a big world and there's so many people out there, but there's also so many people that I just don't really have anything in common with. So I think it is useful to go to these events and try and find those people that you do connect with.
Yeah, it was great to have you at the Cupcake and Gamepad Social. Can you tell us a bit about your early life and career? Where did you grow up? And how did you make your first steps into the games industry?
Yeah, so I grew up in Orange County in California. I grew up in Anaheim, right next to Disneyland, and I went to school at UCLA. So, like, if you grew up in California, the state schools were very, very inexpensive at the time. And I basically got an extremely lucky break. I was in a graphics programming class, and we had a little project that was like make a little animation with OpenGL. And another student in the class just happened to be a student that was working in the games industry and just taking a few extra classes. And he liked the demo that I put together and he just asked me if I wanted to work at his company as an intern over the summer. And it was just, one of these very lucky, unbelievably happenstance things where I was just doing my homework and someone offered me a job. And so I took it, and from there it was kind of history.
Wow, that's very cool. Certainly makes like school and university seem more worthwhile.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I will say is just like I guess there's a lot of people that were also in that class and put together projects, and I think they didn't get as obsessive as I did about it, and I think obviously there was something about what I was doing that stood out to him. At least in the rest of that class, I think it's a less competitive field than the whole industry. But with the 30, 40 people in that class, at least there was something I did by being really obsessive about the craft and learning and trying to express myself even back then that stood out to some random other person, luckily.
Mm. And then, so how did schooling shape you as a person and professionally?
I think school for me, like I think because I wasn't a very popular or social person, I very much obsessed with getting deep on topics. And so like I've really like I can get interested in anything, I can dig deep in any topic. And I think the thing that really stood out to me is that there was just so much joy in learning for me. And so even from a very young age, I, to my detriment, probably didn't socialize enough, but got really, really interested in a lot of topics, including things like philosophy or programming or all this kind of stuff. I was sort of teaching myself all these things. And I think it just sort of taught me how to learn, which I think is actually a skill that is a lot harder than people give it credit for. I think a lot
Mm.
of people know how to like study for an exam or how to pass a test, but to really learn and understand and have that curiosity was something that just sort of developed in me very, very early.
That was very cool. And how do you think that game education has changed since you've been in it?
I think it's changed a lot. So back then, I'm 42 now. Back then, there was no such thing as like a games degree of any kind. There was no games design or games programming, no games degrees or universities. And I think because of that, you just had to pick something that was kind of tangential. I studied psychology, computer science, and philosophy as my majors. And so, there was lots of things I was interested in. I was very lucky that on the one hand, there was nothing to direct me towards games, but on the other hand, there's nothing to direct anyone else towards games either. So I still think about the application that I put forth when I graduated to Insomniac that got me the job. And I was always think about how if someone tried to put something like that together today, it wouldn't even get you an interview. Like it's so much more competitive because there's so many programs that sort of direct people towards this industry. And I think that's really nice that like you can specialize, you can get, a little bit more of a curated experience towards the industry. So I think that's really nice. But obviously, the downside of it is it's so competitive now. When I've been hiring for my team, it's just like the quality of people out there is unbelievable.
Do you think you would have done a game specific course if you were studying now?
I think I probably would have. Like, I think even like I remember when I was at UCLA, DigiPen started up when I was in my second year, and I was like, oh, I should have done that. Like, I would have been so nice if I was 1 year younger and I could have applied to that. So I think I would have been really interested in it. But I think there also is something really nice about my friends from college are a much wider set of people with a much wider set of interests. So there is something about that. Like I'm making a game set in Greek mythology right now, and a lot of that does come from inspirations from a lot of the reading that we did of like Plato and Aristotle and philosophy and stuff like that. So it's hard to say, but I feel like if the option was there, I loved games so much growing up that I definitely would have at least tried it.
Mhm. And is your family creative? Do you come from a creative family? Do they have much to say about your
Nope.
profession?
They hate it. They absolutely hate it. Yeah, it's so one of the things that I think is like so my dad is a chemist, and my mother was a postal worker. And as soon as I got my degrees, they were like, "Oh, cool, he's a computer scientist. He'll go work at Microsoft or something like that." And then my first job straight out of school was at Insomniac, and they were not happy about it at all. And I think the first 3 or 4 years of my career, the only question they would ask me is like, "Well, when are you going to get a real job? What are you going to do when they stop making video games?" And it's really interesting now, 20 years on, that like they're like, "Oh, well, it seems to have stuck okay," but like they still do ask now and then of just like, why am I still making games? When am I going to do something like more serious?" And I don't know. I just sort of have to let it slide off my back.
Oh gosh, that must be challenging. Like 20 years. You're like, well, still making video games, like they still exist.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think it's just a different mentality that they have where I they came over from Taiwan and they sort of wanted to give us the best chance we could. So I could understand how they're just like, okay, take all the safe bets you can because we took all the risk
Mhm.
for you. And then they see me doing something risky and I'm just like like it's worked out. And obviously I'm very grateful that I think if they hadn't taken the risks and given me the stability that they did, I wouldn't have been able to take the risks that I took and had them pay off the way that I wanted to. So, on one hand, I am very grateful for some of the decisions they made, and I understand their frustration. But is also frustrating that like they still don't really take my job seriously.
Yeah. They're just wanting the best.
Yeah, exactly.
What is the best advice that someone else gave you when you were starting on your journey, and did you follow it?
Yeah, I think the best advice that I ever got was just to dabble in a lot of things. I remember it was at Insomniac, and I was being pulled into some of the game design meetings from the perspective of, oh, we need a gameplay programmer in here to tell us if this stuff is possible or not. But I started, throwing out a couple ideas and stuff like that, and someone pulled me aside and was like, you have a pretty good design instinct, and you should really focus on being a programmer and a designer, but also trying to get your fingers in as many things. And I think they probably said it from like they just sort of want to encourage this part of me. But the part that I really appreciate now in retrospect is like all the things that you learn as a creative in other disciplines helps you communicate with those people. And now that I'm kind of running a team and I have, an artist and a content designer and a writer and sound designer and a composer, it is nice that I've always had this attitude of trying to understand all the other disciplines, trying to, do a little bit in each of them so that, well, I really wanted to get better, but even though I ended up being terrible at a lot of those things, I think it really has helped me communicate with people on what I'm trying to go for or speak their language or understand what challenges they face when they're trying to implement stuff in my game.
Sounds like you've got like a good rounded overview then, even if you're not great at other disciplines.
Yeah, I hope so.
So you've worked on some big titles like Little Big Planet and Ratchet and Clank. What was it like working on a major games that have got such a high profile?
It was strange because that was early in my career and I kind of didn't know any better. Like it's like I just
Mm.
got so lucky that my first job out of school was Insomniac, and then I came over to the UK to work at Media Molecule. And so the gravity of it really didn't dawn on me. It wasn't until I had left those teams that I was like, Oh wow, those were really, really big projects with a lot of pressure on them. And I just didn't know to be
Who
nervous
knew?
at the time. Exactly. Yeah. I think the other part of it is that those teams were like so dense with talent, but also like so nurturing. Like I think you can't make games at that scale with such small teams without everyone trying to help each other. And I think that was the other thing that sort of blinded me from the gravity of the situation is that like any problem I was having, any day that I was like, oh, I need to do this, but I don't know how, there's a whole room full of geniuses that you can just go to and ask, like, how would you do this? Oh, I'm trying this. What do you think of this approach? And so yeah, it was genuinely like an unbelievable thing. And I think if I started where a lot of my friends started in the industry, I have friends that, worked their first 8 or 9 years in the industry and had zero ship titles. And it's just so weird for me to be like, oh yeah, I worked at Insomniac and we shipped a title every year. And then I worked at Media Molecule for a couple of years and we shipped another big title. It's just like, it's, I'm very, very grateful. And I was grateful back then, but I didn't realize how lucky I was until I left and started doing, less large or less well known projects.
Mhm. And how has that experience at those larger game studios influenced your approach to indie game development?
Yeah, I always look back at my CV, and I don't think it was planned this way, but it's always like work at a big company, work at a small company, work at a big company, work at a small company. And I think the thing that I realized is that the amazing thing about working at a small company is that like there's so much to do and so many things to try and so many things to be bad at, and to learn and grow. And then I always realized that like the way I subconsciously chose roles is I would like when I was on a small team, there's like, oh, I want to branch out into this or I want to branch out into this. I'd be like, oh wow, I'm really bad at this, and I there's no one on the small team that I can ask for help. And so I'd usually join a big team and be like, okay, what is the big team that I could join that has someone that can kind of mentor me on this part of, whether it's games business or games design or narrative design or whatever that I really want to grow in. And so, yeah, I think those big teams are always great for not feeling all of the pressure of a project, and then being able to focus on one thing and get really good at it. But every time I've done that for a while, I'll just be like, okay, now I'm good at this thing and I'm getting kind of bored. So I'll usually pop back down to like a really small team where I get to do a bunch of different stuff and I get to try things that, because in a big studio, you have someone that's exceptional at everything. So they're not going to let me try a bunch of weird stuff because I'm really bad at it. So I always like going back to the small team experience to be able to grow myself and to really like feel and see where my weaknesses are so I can, learn from that and grow more.
So you've sort of like dabbled in different development roles. What would you say is the main role that you've had?
I think in terms of time, it's definitely gameplay programming. I've done so much gameplay programming over the last 20 years. I'd probably say at least 15 years of it has been that. But I've also dabbled in, design and leadership and management. And more recently, this is my first project as a creative director, which is really exciting. So yeah, I think most of the time was spent gameplay programming. But I think the other interesting thing about gameplay programming is it does have a lot of other like toes in other disciplines. So like you do a lot of design, you also do a lot of like production of like organizing a feature and trying to get everyone on the same page and that kind of stuff. But yeah, my title most of my career has been gameplay programmer.
And could you explain a little bit more about what exactly a gameplay programmer is and what role they play in the development process?
Yeah, definitely. So a gameplay programmer is, one of the subsets of programming, and it tends to be the one that's most player facing. So you'll often do things that are like very direct. So like, anything that is player presses something on the controller and something happens. You'll be in charge of all that kind of stuff, whether it's, the control of the main character or the camera or that kind of thing. But then anything that they're directly interacting with, whether it's like objects in the world like doors or platforms or switches or enemies in the world, whether it's writing the enemy AI or level design or like, or sorry, not a gameplay programmer wouldn't normally do the level design, but you would implement all the pieces that a level designer would use to build the level. So it's very like heavily player facing, where I think there's other programming roles like an engine programmer that's like writing really low level stuff that the gameplay programmers use, or tools programmers, which are writing pieces of software that the other developers use to make the game. The gameplay programming role is the one that's most close to player interactions.
Cool. So, at what point did you decide to start your own thing with Team Artichoke?
So yeah, Team Artichoke is, I'm trying to think. I'm like, it's the third time that I've started something. And the first time was an absolute disaster. The second time went pretty well. That was the indie project we did, Knights and Bikes. And I think this was the first time that I thought I really want to learn, like I really want to focus on the creative side. I've always been like a programmer that dabbled in game design, and I'm like, I really want to be the primary game designer on a project to learn where my weaknesses are and grow there. So I started this in what, maybe 2022, maybe at the beginning of 2022. I just decided like Knights and Bikes did well enough that I've got like a bit of a financial buffer behind me, and it's time to take this risk. And if I'm a terrible game designer and I make a terrible game and it flops, like I'll still be okay. And so I just thought it was a good time to try it.
Definitely a good example of if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. No, but it's cool to hear that there was a failure before a success, because I feel like a lot of
It always
people,
is, right?
yeah, and I feel like a lot of time people like miss that part. It's like you
Mhm.
just see the shiny thing that worked. So it's always nice to hear like where it didn't work so well, and that it's a work in progress and improvements each time, I guess.
Yeah, there's definitely like a survivorship bias in terms of like, I guess very naturally all the talks are from people that are already successful. But I also think people love to rewrite history to be like, I'm a genius and every single thing I planned went perfectly. It's just like, yeah, it's like even the successes that I have, I'm often like, I don't know how that worked. Like I like one of the examples I give right now is like, Knights and Bikes launch, as far as I was concerned, was a flop. But over the 5 years that it's been out, it has done surprisingly good in the long term. And like I still constantly think about like, I'm like, I don't know who's buying this game still. Like it's not like I know how to market anything. It's just like I just get the monthly reports from all the platforms. I'm like, people are still buying it. Okay, like I'm very grateful, but I don't know how or why they're like how they heard about it or why they're buying it. But yeah, I'm very very grateful of that. But yeah, I think a lot of people love to believe that they know exactly why they were successful, and it's just because that they, as an individual, are some kind of super genius. Like I'm definitely not in that camp at all.
Oh, that's really cool. So tell us a bit about Mythmatch and what is the game about, and how you went to select this story around it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's funny because one of the reasons I started the project was like I want to, it's been 20 years. I've always wanted to do more game design, and I've tried in so many studios to move in that direction, but I think because I've always been a better programmer than designer, I never got a chance, and it was always like it was more valuable for me to do programming. So I thought a lot about like the themes of rejection and belonging and being good enough as like how do I make a game about this? And so originally the game was just set in Mount Olympus, and it was just like the gods of Olympus are just cruel and horrible and rejecting you, and it's just gatekeeping, gaslighting all the way up. And it finally occurred to me of just like I think once I got a little bit less angry and more at peace with the project, I realized, oh, like the ending should really be about, community and coming together and finding your people and, despite all this rejection, finding somewhere where you belong. And as soon as I started thinking about that, I was like, okay, what are the mechanics that I can use that really capture this feeling of belonging? And it was interesting because I was working at a company called Trail Mix. They made a game called Love and Pies, and they were making a merge game. And I funny enough, the prototype I had from many many years ago was also a merge game, but I didn't know the term merge game. I'd never heard of this before, and it was just interesting to see all the fun things that they were doing with these mechanics. And the idea of merge is basically you match three things and it transforms into something else. So instead of Candy Crush, where you're trying to get rid of stuff, you're trying to build up over time. And I just felt like this is such a amazing analogy for like bringing small things together and then becoming more and more powerful over time, and just like every single person or voice counting. And I just thought, oh, there's something really cool here. And so I started working more and more on the other part of the game, which is sort of more of like an Animal Crossing style village sim, and trying to capture the feeling of being someone that comes into a world that you don't understand and being useful and helping people, but also not taking over a community. So yeah, those are kind of some of the experiences and inspirations for Mythmatch. But it's been a journey to get here.
I do love that idea of like a merge game because there's certain bits of games you're like, I love this, I love this.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you haven't put a release date on the game. What made you decide that, especially as most other companies I feel do put a release date on them?
Yeah, I think part of it is just that we're such a small team and it's such an unpredictable team in many ways. My goal for this was primarily there's always the adage that you can either make something it's like good, fast, cheap, pick two. And I was like, I definitely don't want like if I had to pick two, I would rather have good and cheap. And so I was like, I want to give people on the project, including myself, like time to explore and make sure it's right and it's the game that we want to make. And obviously, I have the luxury of that because of the sales of previous games. So I didn't want to set a particular date on it, saying like, oh, it's going to be done at this point. Especially because for a long time we were trying to figure out what is the game and what is it supposed to feel like and how do we express these ideas. And I think the other part of it is that like there's so many complexities in releasing a game that like I think the dream is always to get to the point where like the game is done and it's ready to go and then you announce the release date is in 2 weeks and then you get it done because I think there's so many projects that just end up putting a release date out there and then having to change it over and over and over again. And I feel like it makes perfect sense because a release date is a big marketing beat. Like I think it's something that people really get excited about a project over because it's like we can finally think about when we're going to be able to buy it. But for me, having a team that's just me and, all part time freelancers, I think it's really hard to predict when it'll be done. And I also don't ever want to rush the project if I don't have to.
That makes sense. I feel like for me, from a consumer perspective, I really like when I know a date for a game and it's coming out in like the foreseeable future rather than in like 2 years' time. And I'm like, I'm going to have forgotten about it by then. Like,
Yeah, for
I'm
sure.
going to have lost the hype. Like, tell me I can buy it very soon and then I've got something to look forward to and I don't forget about it.
I feel like we made that mistake on Nights and Bikes, and it's just like we did the Kickstarter campaign, and it felt like okay. By the time it was, I think 3.5 years before it came out after the Kickstarter campaign, and I think one of the reason our launch was like so weak was like I think a lot of the people that were really excited about the game had completely forgotten about it. Like 3.5 years is a long, long time. And so yeah, on this one I was much more like let's get it to a point where we're happy to show it and then we'll announce its existence and then basically, I want the game mostly finished before we announce a release date.
That's cool. Well, we look forward to hearing the release date because then we know that it's coming out soon. So, as you transitioned from being a gameplay programmer to a creative director, how have your responsibilities evolved? And how does it feel to have a wider responsibilities from design to people management?
Yeah, it's been a journey for sure, and I think the one thing that makes me feel less bad about it, is every single person I've hired on the project. I've been very, very clear at the beginning. I was just like, this is my first time creative directing something. I don't really know what I'm doing. We're gonna go down a lot of paths that will end as dead ends, and the only thing that's most important is that we can communicate to each other. So if there's something in my process that isn't working for you, I really need you to tell me because I don't really know what I'm doing. But also, if like I'm going to be very transparent on if I think we're going down a route that isn't going to be fruitful, or if you have an idea that's really cool but doesn't really fit into the framework of the game we're trying to make. So setting that up front was really important, but there were definitely a lot of things that like I still regret and I feel like I did wrong. And that like one of the things I learned pretty early in the process was I was always bitter at all the times that a creative director would give me some task and it was so detailed that I was just like, there's no room for expression for me. And I also disagree with these details. And so one of the mistakes I made early on is that I kind of, in the back of my head, I had an idea of what I thought was going to be the best version of a feature or something like that. But I wouldn't say that. I'd be like, okay, I'll just make it a little bit more open so you feel like you have space to explore. And then at the end of the day, it would always be like, oh no, like I already know what I like and what I want here. And me not telling them is just setting them up for failure. So communication stuff like that, like I learned that pretty quickly of just like, oh yeah, I actually need to tell them what I want. And it's much better to say this is exactly what I think it's going to be, but I'm open-minded to any ideas that you have or any changes you want to make or any other directions you think I should consider, rather than being like, oh, I'm holding back information from you that you really need to do your job.
That's quite an honest approach. Why do you feel like more people don't do that? Or at least that's my impression. More people, more people don't do that than do.
Like you mean why people aren't as like brutally honest?
Yeah, because you saying essentially, I don't know what I'm doing. That's quite a vulnerable place
Yeah.
to put yourself in, like voluntarily.
Yeah, I think it just really comes down to making sure people are on the same page. Like I feel like I genuinely think it's really hard to get any two people to have that much overlap on what their mental models of the universe is on anything.
Mm.
So it's just something that I feel like maybe I've always struggled with, always being on the same page as others, that I'm just like the best chance we have is if we're super honest with each other. And even then, like it's still difficult. So yeah, I think for me, it's just like I feel like if you're going to be, withholding information from each other or that kind of thing, like it's just going to be so much harder to get the results that you want for the game. That like it's funny that like the way you mentioned like why did I choose this, like it's not even like I chose it, it's like there's no other approach I could have possibly imagined. Maybe it's just me as a person. I'm just like a very I just put everything out there. I just say whatever I'm thinking, and I try and surround myself with people that are like ready for like this level of honesty.
Mhm. How do you sort of facilitate that space to give feedback? Is there a particular like way that you make that like a super safe and easy thing to do, or is it just like the environment has just made it really easy to make that happen?
Yeah, I think it really does come down to initial alignment. Like when I've been interviewing for team members, I very much say, this is the project, this is what we're trying to do, these are the aims of it, and these are like the core pillars. And I think if you can get everyone agreed at that stage, like it is usually a lot easier to make sure that feedback is this is what we're trying to do and this is why it's not working, rather than like I don't like your idea or something like that. So I think it just frames the conversation a little bit more towards the project and a lot less towards like personal stuff. But I think the other part of it that I find really interesting is that like I always thought about when I was writing the first draft of the story, I was just, just me on the project. And I had a friend who was a screenwriter that would give me feedback. And it was really interesting to me that like it would always be that my brain was like, I know they're right and I know this is valuable feedback, but then there's something in my soul that is just like in more pain than you could possibly imagine. And I think like I was always aware of that feeling that I had of just like, even if you know they're right, and even if, you're going to take the advice and act on it, I know that it hurts. And I think just making sure that we all kind of acknowledge that of just like, when you're giving feedback, giving people time to process it. And because that's the thing, like, it would hurt for a while and then eventually the emotional side of it would fade a little bit, but the concepts and the ideas that they're putting forth would always stick. And I think that's something that was always important to me of just like when I give feedback, it's like, okay, well, this is why it's not working. And like, I know like that it probably hurts and like it will take time. And so we don't necessarily have to like act on something immediately, or I can just say like, okay, this is something we need to think about at some point because it's not working when players experience it. But I think also my team, like, I think the more we've worked together, the more we're just used to giving feedback to each other. And it just being a very natural part of the process, especially because a lot of times it's like, oh, I'll put something in and the feedback they'll give me is just like, oh, that actually solves a bunch of problems that have been nagging at me. And so like I feel like we've gotten much better as a team about it, but I am always aware that like I'm very sensitive to creative feedback, and I'm sure everyone else is sensitive to creative feedback. And sometimes you got to give people space and time on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's like really interesting to hear sort of how that's approached. What has been your biggest achievement in games so far?
My biggest achievement, I would probably say, I would probably say actually getting Knights and Bikes done and out there. Like I learned so many things, if especially if I compare the first time I started a company to the second time I started a company. Like there's so many things that I didn't even know I didn't know the first time that I knew were problems coming into it, and I scrambled and I tried my best and they kind of ended up okay. But I think making a game like that with two people full time and like two contractors, I was just like I sometimes I go back and look at that game and I'm just like, I can't believe that a tiny team of people made this. And then I also on the next level, like I can't believe that it has like worked out financially. Like it just especially because when it came out, I was just like I literally got a job. Like I think we had launch and I started at a new company 2 weeks later because I was just like, this is a disaster. I'm out of here. We're just gonna, call that a fun experiment and move on. And just, being able to look back at it and seeing that it was, creatively really interesting. Like production wise, surprisingly okay, even though it took a long time, and that it was reviewed well and it sold well is just like, yeah, I'm really, really happy with that.
That sounds just like amazing hearing you talk about it. And like you've had a lot of ups and downs, like you've had some wins, some losses. How do you balance wanting to make those big achievements versus making progress with?
Yeah, I think you actually can never aim at the big achievements. Like I think like they sort of come along sometimes and you feel very grateful for them, but I think you just have to target all the small wins. And so it's little things like for example on Myth Match last week, there was just one UX problem that had been driving me up the wall for literally months. I was just like this just isn't working and I've tried 5 or 6 versions of it and every single version is bad. And just, I finally tried one more thing. Oh no, it was I was actually chatting with my content designer and I was explaining I'm like, there's this problem and there's these 4 constraints and you can't solve all 4 constraints at the same time. And the only way you could make all of this work together is if you did this. I'm like, wait, like maybe we should try this. And then she gave a bunch of like really useful like suggestions on like how we could make the friendship this was specifically for like the friendship like leveling system, and she gave a bunch of like suggestions and really cool moments that she would want to get into the new kind of system, and it just got me really excited and I implemented it. Like literally it took like 2 hours after months of turmoil, and I was just like I played through it and I was just like I've only played this for an hour or so, but I feel like it's so much better and there's so much opportunities. So I really think you do have to just keep chasing those small wins. And those small wins can be things like finding a great collaborator. It can be like one tiny like fix on the project. It can be like, one fan that's really like that played the demo is really obsessed with the game. I think the big achievements are just like these weird lucky things that you can't control that are a culmination of a bunch of small wins.
Hmm. That's a really good way of looking at it. I'm just like taking notes. So, I want to touch on some bits about diversity in video games. And you are a founding member of Pock and Play, a group that works to further diversity in the industry and culture. Can you share your thoughts on the current state of diversity in the games industry?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's simultaneously getting better and worse at the same time, and I think they're reactions to each other. I think it actually is getting better. Like when I think about the applicant pool that I've had when I've put jobs out, like it is far more diverse than when I've been hiring at big companies or throughout my career. So I think like the talent is getting there. But I think, at the end of the day, like there's a lot of the creative industries that are about creativity and the best ideas and skills, but there's also just a lot of it that's just about money and being entrenched and trying to extract as much money as you can out of the company that you are in charge of. So I think, in terms of like parts of the industry where it's much more about being entrenched and being defensive, like I think things are getting a lot worse at a very, very fast rate. But I think, I am very positive, especially like, some of the events that Pocket Play puts on. I'm sure the events that you've put on, the communities are growing really, really strong. The talent pool is getting really great. And, maybe they're not like reaching into like the number one top grossing games out there right now, but there's some really, really interesting stuff coming out of, more diverse communities. And I think that's great. Like, I think the other thing that I think is great is that like these communities are coming together and helping each other. And I think that's a thing that's been lacking for a while. It's just like when you don't have anyone within a community that's sort of been there, done that, has the success and resources to help out, like it's really hard for everyone to just like pull themselves up by their bootstraps, or just like for people with no power to just like help each other. And I think it has been getting better and better over time, but obviously a lot of the social movements are seeing this and reacting to it and in not very nice ways.
Yeah, I hear that. It can be challenging to look at, and October, right? So Black History Month.
I'm
It's
expecting some
gonna,
calls. I don't know.
yeah.
Uh,
We'll see how that goes out this year. The one time of year that everyone seems to suddenly be able to find a plethora of diversity. Just find all the Black people. It's like, I'm sure they've always been there.
Yeah, exactly.
they get stored in the same place that Christmas lights go on the 26th.
So in your hiring process, you've mentioned avoiding arbitrary parameters like years of experience. Can you elaborate on that approach to building a diverse and inclusive team?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I learned very quickly from like looking at job descriptions and seeing like, especially, having mentored a few people and hearing them talk about their doubts about applying for stuff, I think it became very clear that the more marginalized you are, the more you feel this weight on your back, that you don't want to embarrass, your group or whatever it is. And so it makes you just not apply for stuff. And I think when you start putting stuff in a job description that just makes people doubt themselves and remove themselves from the process, like it can get really bad. And like at the end of the day, like all I need is someone to do the job. And so I learned from, I think it was Glowmade's job descriptions, where it's just a list of things that you will be doing. And I just like, oh, it's so much easier for someone who's doing the work to read, oh, I need to do this, and think I do that all the time. That's fine. Where if it's something like, oh, this many ship titles or this many years in the industry, it's like, well, they might not have that, or they might be like, oh, I kind of do, but it doesn't count.
Mm.
And even things like, the example I always give is just like sometimes like you'll write things like excellent communication skills. And like people that just like blow through the world never doubting themselves, they're like, of course I have excellent communication skills. I talk to people. And people that feel this pressure, they're just like, I mean, I can talk to people, but would I say excellent? Like, is it just like it, it's just removing people from the pool. And so yeah, all my job descriptions, like the two things that I do that are a little bit out there, or a little bit uncommon, I would say, I wouldn't say out there, is everyone gets paid the same amount. So upfront, I say this is the rate for this job. Everyone on the team gets paid the same day rate. And then the other thing is I write all the job descriptions just saying, I need someone to do these three things. If you can do these three things, please apply.
That is just so interesting to hear someone say that out loud. So I've been doing a lot of job hunting, and I don't apply for many jobs because a
Yeah.
lot of them will say like, you need excellent communication skills.
Yeah.
And normally I'm like, I have amazing communication skills, but as soon as I read it on that job description, I'm like, well, they could do with a lot of improvement.
Exactly.
I'm like, there's
I wouldn't
certain
say
areas
excellent,
that
and you
like,
see,
yeah, I'm like, I mean, I'm good at talking, but like, then if it's an email, I'm not as good, and then I start like doubting myself, like the dark cloud just comes in. It's like, you're not good at any of these things. The things that I
Yeah.
was so adamant I was very good at, suddenly I'm like, nah, there's gonna be someone way better than me.
Yeah, I think that's the dangerous part about it, and it's just like it's hard because like it's ingrained in us, like we've been brought up like often being told like you're not good enough for this, you're not good enough for this, and you start internalizing that. And I think on one hand, we probably do need to address that internalization as well, and like but also like if you can just use the words that help you still find the right people without ruling out a bunch of people for reasons that have nothing to do with the job you need done, then like
Mhm.
it's great. Like, and it's, and it's not just that, like, it's not just that you get more diverse applications, you get more high quality applications. And
Mhm.
so I always think about like the VFX artist that I hired. She'd never had a job in the video games industry before, but she was, the best portfolio that I saw, and she was incredible. And I had a set of tasks. I'm like, these are the tasks I need done. And I was like, here's 4 days to do them. And she did everything in 2 days, and she was done. And she's doing great now. And it's just one of those things of like, would she have applied to something that's like, oh, you need two ship titles and 4 years of experience? Like, of course she wouldn't have, like it just, but she's genuinely so good. Like, and she's, very well employed now.
That makes so much sense. I love that idea of like listing, here's what you're going to be doing. I feel like that's such a like two-way benefit, because then you as the employer can be like, you're getting a good pool of talent, and then the person applying also knows what they're in for, because a lot of times like job descriptions are so vague, like they're like this mythical beast. And you're like, okay, but what am I actually doing? Because you're saying I need these skills, but it's so dependent. Like there's a lot of stuff I do every day very well.
And I
So
will shout out the Glome job descriptions that I was inspired by. I think they have two sections, and I think one section, because they hire full time people, I just hire freelancers. They have one section that's like, from day one, we need you to do these things, and then within 6 months, we will work with you to learn how to do these other things. And so, like, it takes like a job requirement and it pivots it to be like, oh, here's an opportunity. Like, if you can do these three things already, we can help you learn these other things that will get you further in your career. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. One day I hope I can have some full-time people that, I am working with for long enough periods of time that I can also invest in their skill set like that.
yeah, I could talk about this all day, and I'm sure it's helpful for like listeners that are maybe a bit intimidated about applying for jobs in the games industry. But I'm definitely gonna check
Yeah.
out Glowmade's job descriptions now.
And I think that's the other thing of like, everyone always gives the advice of just apply, and I think that is actually the correct advice. And I think people don't take it like far enough. Like, there was
Mm.
someone that I mentored a couple years ago, and there was a job that popped up, and it's like, oh, you need like 2 years of experience. I'm like, just apply. Like, it just doesn't matter. Like, at the end of the day, like, what does it hurt you to like just shoot another email out there? And like most companies, they're not even going to respond anyway if they don't want you there. So like it's zero effort for them because they're rude and obnoxious. But yeah, like I think people don't even take it to that, because like I will never forget this moment when I put out my first job listing. It was for the writer on the project, and because I had put out this job listing for a writer, someone put in a speculative application, and it was they said, I would like to be the programmer on your team. And I was like, wait, I'm the programmer on my team. And then they were like, I don't yet know how to program, but I'm planning to learn soon. And I was just like, the audacity. But I'm like, I'm also not offended. Like, it took me 20 seconds to read this email and archive it. Like, it doesn't harm me in any way for people to just like overly apply for stuff.
Yeah, that is just apply for everything. It's definitely good advice, because you never know. And sort of touched on like applications saying that you need to have worked on a game before, but how important is it for someone new to have made a game before?
It's not that important that they've made a game before specifically, but it is important that they can demonstrate those skills. So if
Mhm.
I put out a job description that says these are the three tasks that you're going to be doing, I have to in some way be able to determine that I think you can actually do these three tasks. So I think portfolios are really important, and especially like phrasing of a portfolio in terms of what skills it shows off rather than like how cool it is. I think like a lot of when I was hiring the writer, like, everyone that I interviewed had great writing samples, for example. And it's just like, well, if there's no evidence that you can do these tasks for me, there's no way I can really, get to the interview, because like I think it's very hard to determine any that much from an interview, especially in terms of like skill and ability. So with the application, I need some kind of evidence that shows that you can do the tasks that I need to get done. But it's not, it's not that it has to be like in a ship game or even in a game jam game. It's like if you have, a bunch of weird Unity scenes that each show one particular skill, and those are the skills I need, then that's great, So I think it should be more focused on what are the skills that you have, especially the ones that you feel like are your strongest skills. Like, how are you showing them off to me? Whether it's like, do you have one of my favorite things when people apply is when they have like a super short video, like maybe a 20-second clip of a video, and then they have like a little blog post that's like, here's the thought process I went to, here's the things I tried, here's what didn't work, here's what I learned. It's like, it's so valuable for me to like get into someone's head to say like, oh, they not only do this, they're also capable of learning, and they're also capable of communicating. Like, these are like all super valuable skills.
That's really cool to hear, and good example of like how to demonstrate those skills as well. So thank you for sharing that. So recently, the games industry has been facing some significant challenges with a lot of layoffs and studio closures. As an indie developer, how has this affected your work and perspective on the industry?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think funding has dried up pretty badly for indie devs. And I think it very much made me pivot from this like, there's a small version of the game I could make, but I'll always be pitching to publishers trying to make a slightly bigger version of it. And at one point, I was just like, there's no point in spending any time, worrying about publishers. And I think that was really important for me in two respects. The first one was like you spend so much time like preparing specific builds and documents and pitch decks and that kind of stuff for them. But I think also I was always trying to think about like, oh, what am I trying to express with this game, and what do I think players are going to want? And once I threw in that third consideration of what do I think people with money want, like it made it really hard to design the game. Like it was just like I'm like, okay, this is what I would do if it's for me, and this is what I do for players, and those are well aligned. It's like now there's this third person I need to try and impress. I'm just like, oh, it really messed with my game design philosophy. And so I was eventually, after the first year of trying to pitch the game out, I was just like, okay, we're just going to make the small version, and that's fine. And once I made my peace with that, like there was a bunch of design decisions that I was like, oh, this is easy. Like, oh, there's all these features that I put in the hopes that maybe one day it would be bigger. Oh, well, I can delete all that code. I don't need to worry about that anymore. So yeah, I think it helped me focus my project, but obviously for people that need the money to do anything and to move a project forward, like it's definitely going to be a brutal environment to be in, where you're having conversations and pitches with people trying to get money from them, and then a week later you find out they shut down, they had no money in the first place. I don't know why they were taking the meetings in that situation, but like there have been multiple situations like that where I remember specifically one of my friends was like, oh, you should reach out to these two publishers at Develop this year because I think your game's really suited to them. And I was like, I'm not really pitching to publishers anymore, so I'll pass. And then both of them shut down like a month after Develop, and I was like, well, I'm glad I didn't take the time like trying to prepare for those meetings. So yeah, it's definitely a really a difficult environment for indie devs that need funding to move something forward, because if you're in that situation, you can't just keep making the game better. Like you're just kind of stuck and waiting. Where obviously I feel very, very lucky to be in the situation where the previous game is still making money, and so I can always be moving the project forward and trying to build my own audience, trying to improve the game, trying to get feedback from players and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I feel very lucky even in this really dire environment.
Wow, yeah, that's a really like interesting view as well. The fact that that sort of cut out, I guess, a bit of weight and helped you really narrow down. Yeah, no, that's really interesting to hear. Thank you for that. What unexpected skill have you had to learn in your career?
Let's see. I'm trying to think of what the unexpected. I think undervalued skill, I think, is definitely communication. Like I think as a programmer, we were always told that like the best programmers are like the John Carmacks that are just like, mathematical geniuses and know how to communicate perfectly with a computer. And it took me a couple of years to realize, oh no, it's how well I can communicate with the other people making the project that's far more important than my ability to communicate with computer. And I think that was just one of those things that I think I was always socially awkward, and I never wanted to develop that skill because it was really difficult for me. But once I started getting better and better at it, I was like, oh, like this is a skill just like anything else. And as a person who loves learning new things, I was like, okay, I can develop this skill and I can get better at it. And I think that's definitely, especially from a programming background, one of the massively underappreciated things. And the other part of it is like now when I interview for people, like the number one thing I'm trying to screen for, because there's so much talent and so many people that can actually do the work, is like how well do they communicate with me, like how well do
Mm.
we vibe, how much are we just naturally on the same page, is so important.
Okay. So we're all protagonists in our own stories, and every good protagonist has a goal and a vision of success. What does success look like to you, and are you there yet?
Yeah, I like it's interesting because I feel like I am. Like I'm at the point where I'm making exactly the game I want to make, and I know that even if it sells 0 copies, I'm going to be okay, and I've learned so much in the process, and I've met so many talented people that can help me along the way. And so I think sort of for me defining like what is the next round of success look like for me, I really do think for me it's like I hope I can make a game that does well enough that and I can spread the money around well enough that other people have this ability to actually focus on the projects they're passionate about rather than always having to just focus on the projects that there's money to do the work on. So I have an incredible team of people, and like for example, the artist that I'm working with is also making her game that I'm the programmer on. I'm really excited about a lot of my writer is a film and television writer, and like I'm always excited about the projects that she's working on. So I think that's sort of what I think of as like my next step of goals, is just like how can I in some way or another like support other people to pursue their creative passions.
We like to get some advice from each of our guests that appear on these interviews for aspiring creatives and professionals. So we've been talking about games today. What advice do you have for others listening who might want to get started in the video games industry or wider culture?
Yeah, I think the number one piece of advice I have is to focus on iteration loops. And what I mean by that is just like doing something, getting feedback, and getting better. And I think this works on multiple levels. I think it works really well from like a game design perspective of like putting something out there, like, not spending too much time in design docs or like ideas or whatever, putting stuff in game that you can play and you can be like, I don't like this, I do like this. How do I improve it? How do I make it better? But then, like, the next layer on that is like sharing it with other people and getting feedback from players and seeing what they do and don't understand, what they do and don't like. But I also think it's really important from like a personal self perspective. Like, I think, putting yourself out there, trying to be your authentic self, and actually learning if, like, I spent a lot of my life being someone that I knew I wasn't because I thought that's what other people wanted me to be. And like I never changed because it's just like oh, if someone doesn't like that, it's like, well, they don't like the person I'm pretending to be. Like it doesn't really matter to me. And it wasn't until I started really being comfortable being myself that it's like, okay, I'm really learning what I want to be and how people are responding to it, and growing individually through that process. So yeah, I think just getting that feedback as soon as you can, getting those iteration loops, because it's the only way that you're going to be able to keep growing yourself and your game and your skills.
So this is the part where we like to throw in follow-up questions or random things that didn't quite fit anywhere else. And a couple of things specifically that like came to mind as you were talking, because yeah, it was interesting to hear you talk about obsession and
Mhm.
obsession with like your crafting and getting better. And I really like that. And I've been thinking about that recently, about how to put myself in a position to do the best I can do now.
Mhm.
But like I also feel the word obsession can have like a negative connotation. So how do you see that balance between like the positive and negative of the word?
Yeah, I think for me, I definitely see the dangers of it, but I also think I think probably a better word might be focus. But I think there is something that is very much about being able to prioritize things in your life and make sure that there is sufficient space for the things that need that space. And I also feel like there's positive obsession and negative obsession. Like, I feel like there were times in my life where I was obsessed with stuff because I was trying to get away from something. And there's times that I've been obsessed with stuff because I'm trying to get to something. And I've always felt that the latter one was a lot healthier and, was a lot easier to peel back, because it's like if I'm trying to get to something, I can always say, like, okay, I'm putting this much effort into it. And here's the other things in my life that are not getting enough attention. Like, I can weigh a bunch of positive things against each other, where if it's coming from a negative emotion, there's no real way to like validate or be like, this has gone too far, like when you're trying to escape something. So I think that's sort of how I think about it. But I do agree that there are dangerous parts of obsession, especially if it's coming from the wrong place.
Yeah, and that's the thing to guard against, right? But then it's the positive one that you want, because you need to kind of be in that space to rise above, especially as you're talking about so many good people. How do you rise above, like, for whatever that means for what you want to do? So no, it's a good thing. And something else, just to take you back to her younger days, just as you were talking about that parental disapproval, I imagine there's a lot of young people like today who are faced with that. It's funny how that never goes away. Who are faced with that challenge. Like, how would you advise someone to navigate that? I want to do this thing, if it's games or if it's something else. Typically, it's usually like creative industries related, but parents are just like, no, or like maybe not outright no, but like you were saying, undermining when are you going to get a proper job or that kind of thing. How do you navigate that? Like, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would always say is focus on the skills and focus on yourself, because I feel like sometimes, if your specific goal was like, oh, I want to get in the games industry, I want to get this particular job, I think sometimes it's easy to get distracted and be like, the skill I want to develop is the skill of applying for jobs. And I think if you take a longer view on it, that's kind of like, oh, what are the skills I want to develop? There's two benefits to that. One is that as you keep applying for stuff, what you're applying with as a person and skill set is getting better and better. But also, a lot of skills are highly transferable to other industries as well.
Mm,
I think that's one of my favorite things about the games industry is like, if you're good at anything, there's somewhere in the games industry that's useful. So I think that's what I would say, like, to if someone has disapproving parents or something like that, like, there are a lot of skills that you can use in the games industry that you can also get jobs in other industries. So, for example, if you're working, like, my background, like my parents wanted me to work at Microsoft. Like, if you can't get a job in games, like, there's no shame in taking a job, at Microsoft or, in other software engineering things. And a lot of those skills will help you make games. So yeah, I think the nagging gets particularly louder when you're struggling to get a job in something, and I think there's no shame in getting jobs outside of the games industry. I think a lot of kinds of work will teach you a lot of useful skills, and especially because, as I said, like, one of the most important skills in the games industry is communication, and I think you can learn that almost anywhere.
yeah, no, that's good. That's a good thing to highlight. Like, it doesn't have to be games right now. Could be later. Because yeah, it's time is a flat circle, so you can you can always come
Yeah.
back. Yeah, no, thanks for that. And the final thing is, like, where can people find you online as you're working on your game?
Yeah, so I use the same handle anywhere. It's one of Moo, ONEOFMOO, and I'm active on Blue Sky, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and I just started a YouTube channel where I'm doing devlogs about Mythmatch.
Cool. Oh, nice. We'll have to find those links and
Yes.
point people to them. But yeah, Move, for the time being, thank you very much for joining us on the show and giving us that perspective.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and appreciate people listening to this episode of Story X Story. So yeah, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode and more interviews like this. You can also give us a 5-star rating and review, because that helps us reach new listeners and fans of story discussions. And we're story creators ourselves, so you can discover our manga universe online, where we have our titles from Samurai Chef to Serious Through the Fog, which is the latest one. And you can also join the Studio 77 Discord today and consider becoming a member to support the work that we do at Maya Mada. And some of that work involves the Do I Look Like a Gamer video game representation campaign, which is our yearly initiative for diversity and inclusion in the video games industry. So we still have a bunch of plans left for the year. And then next year, we do it all again. So you can check out the website looklikeagamer.com to find out about the next event that we've got coming up, and also see the photos of the 40 players and makers, so the galleries there as well. So as for the podcast, we release new episodes on Thursdays, and those include creator interviews, video game discussions, and deep dives into stories across pop culture. You can always give us a shout directly. Our email address is studio77@mymatter.com, and our website with links to subscribe is mymatter.com/storyxstory. So thank you for tuning in, and until next time, stay safe, and remember, there's no compromise here. This is the only place where you can get something that's good, fast, and very, very cheap. So don't forget that. Take care, everyone.